At the dinner table, in the house that was a monument to his success, David placed his fork down. The faint click of silver on porcelain was the only sound in the room, sharp and final. He looked at me, not as a son looks at his mother, but as a doctor looks at a specimen, a problem to be analyzed. His gaze was cold, with the chilling professionalism I had paid for with 2 jobs and 1,000 sleepless nights. "Mom, we need to be honest," he began, and the air in the room grew thin. "A lot of your current health issues could have been avoided with a more responsible approach in the past." Each word was a scalpel, precise and sterile, cutting away not flesh, but the very foundation of my life's sacrifice. He wasn't just talking about my health, he was rewriting our history, erasing my effort and replacing it with negligence. It was the first strike. He was blaming me for my own illness. His wife, Anna, immediately nodded, her perfectly styled hair catching the light from the chandelier above us. "David just means we all need to contribute to the family's well-being," she added, her voice smooth as silk and just as suffocating. My granddaughter, Chloe, looked up from her plate, her young face a canvas of confusion. "But Grandma worked her whole life," she said, a small defiant voice of truth in a room thick with lies. David ignored her, his eyes still locked on me. "This isn't about the past. It's about the future. Your medical bills are, effectively, money from Chloe's college fund. You have to understand that." That was the final blow. It wasn't just a diagnosis of my body, but a verdict on my worth. He had transformed me from his mother into a direct threat to his daughter's future. I didn't flinch. My hand was steady as I lifted my glass of water. The cold glass felt solid, real, in a world that had just dissolved into a nightmare. I took a slow sip, letting the silence stretch, letting their words hang in the air like poison. Then, I placed the glass back on the table with a soft, deliberate click that echoed his own. I met his clinical gaze with a stillness I hadn't known I possessed. "Thank you for your medical opinion, doctor," I said, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of steel. "As it happens, I have a meeting with Mr. Henderson tomorrow. He was the dean of medicine when you were a student. I think he'll be interested to hear how his star graduate is applying his knowledge in the field." The silence that followed was no longer just an absence of sound. It was a living thing, heavy and suffocating. I watched the color drain from David's face, the professional mask cracking to reveal the panicked boy underneath. Anna's polite smile froze, a brittle thing that looked like it might shatter. In that moment, the game changed. I was no longer the patient. I was the prognosis. And for the first time in a very long time, I was the one holding the scalpel. How did it come to this? How did the love I poured into my son curdle into this polite, clinical cruelty? My mind reeled back, not years, but just a few hours, to the moment I arrived at their perfect house. The evening had begun not with a bang, but with a series of quiet, paper-thin cuts, each one designed to bleed me of my dignity long before David delivered his final wound. I had arrived clutching my orthopedic cushion, a recent and unwelcome companion since the car accident. It was a small, gray thing, a constant, lumpy reminder of my body's new fragility. The front door swung open before I could ring the bell. Anna stood there, immaculate in a cream-colored cashmere sweater, her smile as bright and hard as the polished marble floor of her foyer. "Mariana, you're here," she said, her eyes flicking down to the cushion in my hands. A tiny, almost imperceptible frown creased her brow. "Hello, Anna. It's lovely to see you," I replied, forcing a warmth into my voice that I didn't feel. I stepped inside, the scent of expensive reed diffusers, some bland, clean scent like sea salt and linen filling my senses. It was the smell of a house that was cleaned by someone else, a house where life was kept neatly under wraps. As I moved toward the living room, I looked for a place to put my cushion on the impossibly white sofa. "Oh, let me help you with that," Anna said, her tone dripping with false solicitude. Before I could protest, she took the cushion from me, holding it between her thumb and forefinger as if it were a soiled object. "Mariana, please, don't turn our living room into a hospital ward. I'm sure you can be comfortable for a few hours without all this." She tucked it away behind a decorative vase on a side table, effectively hiding my weakness, my need. It was a small act, but it was a message. Your pain is an inconvenience here. Your reality does not fit our aesthetic. I felt a flush of shame creep up my neck, but I just smiled and sat down, the sofa's unforgiving firmness sending a dull ache up my spine. Chloe was the first to greet me properly. She bounded into the room and threw her arms around my neck. "Grandma, did you bring your secret ingredient cookies?" I hugged her back, burying my face in her hair. She smelled of shampoo and childhood. For a moment, her simple, honest affection was a balm. "I didn't have time to bake this week, sweetie, but maybe you can show me that new video game you were telling me about?" "Yeah, it's on the big screen," she said, pulling me by the hand. "Chloe, give your grandmother some space," Anna's voice cut in. "She's just arrived. She needs to rest." The word rest was a weapon in her mouth. It wasn't an offer of comfort. It was a label, a box she was putting me in. The box labeled old, frail, burden. Chloe looked disappointed, but retreated. I was left sitting on the edge of the sofa, a guest in my son's house, a stranger in my own family. Later, I drifted towards the kitchen, drawn by the familiar sounds of dinner preparation. It was an old instinct, the urge to help, to be useful. For 30 years, my hands were never still. They were either scrubbing floors, typing invoices, or packing my son's lunch. Anna was at the vast kitchen island, arranging asparagus spears on a baking sheet with the concentration of a surgeon. "Can I give you a hand with anything?" I asked, my voice hopeful. She turned, a polite, impenetrable smile fixed on her face. "It's all under control, Mariana. You should just sit and relax. You're fragile, after all. We don't want you overdoing it." Fragile, there it was again. She dismissed me with a wave of her perfectly manicured hand. I stood there for a moment, useless, my hands hanging empty at my sides. I looked at my own hands, at the knuckles swollen with a touch of arthritis, the skin thin and map-like with veins. These were the hands that had worked 2 jobs to pay for David's anatomy textbooks and tuition fees. I remembered the harsh smell of industrial floor cleaner from my night job at the office building, a smell that clung to my clothes and hair. I remembered coming home at 2 a.m., my back screaming in protest, only to get up 4 hours later to make breakfast before my day job as a receptionist. These hands were not fragile. They were strong. They had built the very man who now stood silently in the other room, allowing his wife to dismantle his mother piece by piece. The dinner itself was a masterpiece of passive aggression. Every topic of conversation seemed designed to highlight my new limitations. They talked about a hiking trip they were planning, a ski vacation in Aspen. David spoke animatedly about a new demanding surgical technique he was mastering, all activities that were now miles beyond my physical reach. I tried to join in, to ask questions, but my contributions were met with brief, polite answers before the conversation moved on, leaving me behind. I was a ghost at their table, a relic from a past they were eager to forget. I watched David. He was so handsome, so successful. He wore a crisp, dark blue shirt, the color of which brought out his eyes. It was a good color on him. I remembered buying him his first set of proper scrubs, the pride I felt seeing him wear them. He looked like a real doctor. My son, the healer. Now, that same son sat across from me, his face a mask of detached concern, as he prepared to use his healing knowledge not to mend, but to wound. And then, it happened. The small talk died down. Anna gave David a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. It was a signal. The performance was over. The execution was about to begin. He cleared his throat, placed his fork on his plate, and looked at me with that cold, clinical gaze. He began his speech, the one he had clearly rehearsed, the one that would sever the last thread of connection between us. And as he spoke, layering his betrayal with medical jargon and financial guilt, I felt no more pain. The small cuts from the evening had cauterized the wound. There was only a profound, chilling clarity. The woman who had worked herself to the bone for his future was gone. The mother who had forgiven his selfishness was gone. In her place sat a woman who finally understood the diagnosis. My illness wasn't in my body. It was sitting right across from me, wearing my son's face, and it was a condition that required not medicine, but surgery. A careful, precise, and radical excision. My meeting with Mr. Henderson would be just that. The first deep cut. The drive to the university the next morning was an exercise in focus. Every pothole in the road sent a jolt of pain through my hip, a grim reminder of the accident that had started this cascade of betrayals. But I barely registered the physical discomfort. My mind was a quiet, cold, orderly space. The emotional storm of the previous night had passed, leaving behind a landscape of crystalline clarity. I knew what I had to do. David and Anna thought my threat was the emotional outburst of a hurt old woman. They were wrong. It was a business plan. Mr. Henderson's office was on the top floor of the old medical faculty building, a place that smelled of aged paper, lemon polish, and the quiet dignity of institutional memory. It was a world away from the sterile, scent-diffused air of my son's house. This place felt real, grounded in history and principles. The walls were lined with dark wood shelves groaning under the weight of leather-bound medical journals. Sunlight streamed through a tall, arched window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air like tiny, silent witnesses. Mr. Henderson, Dean Emeritus now, greeted me with a warmth that felt like a balm on my raw nerves. He was a kind man with eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled, a man who had dedicated his life to this institution. "Mariana, what a wonderful surprise," he said, shaking my hand gently. His grip was firm, respectful. "Please, sit. Can I get you some coffee? Tea?" "Water would be lovely, thank you, James," I said, sinking into the plush leather chair opposite his grand mahogany desk. It was soft, supportive, a stark contrast to the unforgiving sofa I'd perched on the night before. He poured me a glass from a carafe on his sideboard and settled back into his own chair. "It's been too long. How are you? And how is David? I see his name in the journals from time to time. Head of his department now, isn't he? We're all so proud of what he's accomplished." His words were meant to be kind, a source of shared pride. A day ago, they would have filled my heart. Now, they were simply data points, evidence of the very thing I had come here to discuss. I took a slow sip of water, mirroring the action I'd taken at the dinner table. It was a gesture of control, of centering myself before the battle. "David is very successful," I began, my voice even and calm. I had rehearsed this, not the words but the tone. There would be no tears, no trembling voice, no hint of the victim. I was not here for pity. I was here for accountability. He has a beautiful home, a wonderful family, and a career that has exceeded all my wildest dreams. Mr. Henderson smiled, a genuine, paternal smile. You have every right to be proud, Mariana. You were his biggest supporter. I still remember you coming in here, month after month, with the tuition checks, always paid on time. You looked so tired back then, but so determined. My eyes followed his gaze to the wall behind him. It was covered in framed photographs of graduating classes, a sea of young, hopeful faces. In the center, in a prominent silver frame, was a picture of David's class. He stood in the front row, beaming, holding his diploma like a trophy. And there I was, standing just behind the velvet rope in the crowd, a blur of a woman in a simple dress, my face etched with an exhaustion so deep it looked like a part of my bones, but my smile was the brightest in the entire photograph. The contrast between that moment and last night's dinner was a physical blow. I brought my gaze back to Mr. Henderson. I am proud of the doctor I helped create, James. But I'm here today because I believe there was a fundamental flaw in his education, a missing component. His smile faded slightly, replaced by a look of professional curiosity. A flaw? What do you mean? Our curriculum is one of the best in the country. Oh, the science was impeccable, I assured him. I have no doubt he can diagnose the rarest of diseases. He can read an MRI, perform complex surgery, and recite every bone in the human body. I invested over $50,000 money earned from cleaning floors and answering phones into that education. But it seems the instruction manual for basic humanity wasn't included with the diploma. The air in the room shifted. The friendly nostalgia evaporated, replaced by a tense, serious silence. Mr. Henderson leaned forward, his elbows on the desk. The kindly old dean was gone. In his place was the guardian of an institution's reputation. Mariana, he said, his voice now low and serious. What happened? I laid it out for him, not as a grieving mother, but as a stakeholder presenting a case study. I told him about the accident, the diagnosis, and my subsequent financial dependence. I detailed Anna's campaign of microaggressions, the quiet, persistent effort to label me as a fragile burden. And then I recounted the dinner. I repeated David's words verbatim, the cold, clinical precision of his verdict. A lot of your current health issues could have been avoided with a more responsible approach in the past, I quoted, my voice never wavering. Your medical bills are, effectively, money from Chloe's college fund. I let the words hang in the quiet office. I watched Mr. Henderson's face. The crinkles around his eyes were gone. His jaw was tight. His gaze drifted back to the photograph on the wall, to the image of the proud young graduate and the exhausted, beaming mother. He was connecting the dots, overlaying the memory of my sacrifice with the reality of David's cruelty. He used his medical authority, the very authority I paid for, to diagnose me as a bad investment. I continued. He turned his skills, which were meant to heal, into a weapon to absolve himself of his responsibility. So, I am here, James, not to complain about my son. I'm here to ask a question about the ethical standards of your graduates. Does this institution produce healers, or does it produce highly educated accountants who weigh a parent's life against a tuition fund? I'm here to discuss the return on my investment. Mr. Henderson was silent for a long time. He steepled his fingers, his gaze fixed on the photograph of David. The sunlight glinted off the silver frame, making it seem impossibly bright. He looked from the photo to me, and in his eyes, I saw not pity, but a cold, gathering fury. He was a man who believed in legacies, the legacy of his institution, and the personal legacies of its students. David had tarnished both. Finally, he spoke, his voice like stones grinding together. Mariana, what you have described is a profound moral failure. It goes beyond a family matter. It speaks to a person's character, the very core of what makes a physician worthy of the title. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the university campus he had helped build. We have an ethics committee. We also have a very active alumni association, with a board that takes the reputation of our graduates very seriously. David is often a guest speaker at our fundraisers. He is a poster child for our success. He turned back to me, his eyes hard as flint. And a poster child must be flawless. He returned to his desk and picked up his phone. He didn't hesitate. He dialed a number from memory. Gerald, it's James Henderson. I need to schedule an urgent informal meeting with you and the head of the alumni board. It concerns a matter of professional conduct regarding one of our most prominent graduates, Dr. David Miller. He listened for a moment, then said, No, it can't wait. This afternoon, if possible. Thank you. He hung up the phone and looked at me. It was a look of alliance. In that moment, he was no longer just an old acquaintance. He was my general. Leave this with me, Mariana, he said. I will not allow the legacy of this institution to be defined by this kind of ingratitude. I stood up, the dull ache in my hip seeming to lessen. I had walked into this office as a mother betrayed. I was walking out as a strategist who had just secured a powerful ally and opened a new, devastating front in a war my son didn't even know had begun. As I left the building, I didn't feel anger or sadness. I felt the clean, cold satisfaction of a perfectly executed plan. The first shot had been fired, and it had hit its target right in the heart of the one thing David valued more than anything, his pristine, hard-won reputation. I returned home not to an empty house, but to a sanctuary. My small apartment, the one Anna had once called a little dated, felt like a fortress of my own making. It smelled of my life of brewing Earl Grey tea, of old books with cracked spines, of the lavender soap I used. Here, there were no invisible standards to meet, no polished surfaces reflecting a stranger's judgment. I ran my hand over the worn fabric of my favorite armchair, its familiar texture, a comfort. This chair had held me through years of exhaustion after double shifts, supported me as I paid bills at the small desk in the corner, and cradled me as I worried about my son's exams. It knew the truth of my life. I spent the rest of the day in quiet ritual. I watered my plants. I organized my bookshelf. I listened to the classical music station on the radio. Each small, deliberate action was a way of reclaiming myself, of scrubbing away the sticky residue of their contempt. I was not preparing for a fight. I was recalibrating my own world, a world where my worth was not a subject for debate. I knew the call would come. It was not a matter of if, but when. Mr. Henderson was a man of his word, and men like him did not let such matters lie. It was late afternoon when the first tremor arrived. My phone, which had been silent all day, buzzed against the polished wood of my side table. The screen lit up with a name that for 30 years had been a source of pride, a summons I would have answered from the depths of sleep or the middle of a crowded bus. David. I looked at it. For a moment, the old instincts flickered the maternal urge to answer, to soothe, to solve. I saw him not as the cold-eyed doctor at the dinner table, but as the little boy who used to call me from a friend's house, asking if I could pick him up. The boy whose scraped knee was a catastrophe, whose bad dream required my immediate presence. Then, I remembered the clinical detachment in his eyes, the way he had used his words as a scalpel. The boy was gone. A stranger had taken his place. I reached out, my hand steady, and pressed the silence button. The buzzing stopped. The screen went dark. It was a small act of defiance, but it felt monumental. It was the first brick in a new wall, a boundary. A few seconds later, a text message notification appeared. "Mom, we need to talk. Call me." The tone was unmistakable. It wasn't a request. It was an instruction. The casual entitlement of a man who had never been told no by his mother. I read the message, took a sip of my now lukewarm tea, and placed the phone face down on the table. The silence in my apartment felt different now. It was no longer just an absence of sound. It was an active presence. It was my answer. 15 minutes passed. The phone buzzed again. A call. David. I silenced it again. Another text immediately followed. "This isn't funny. I just got a very strange call from James Henderson. What did you say to him?" Ah, there it was. The shift from annoyance to suspicion. The carefully constructed facade was beginning to crack. He wasn't asking how I was. He wasn't apologizing. He was interrogating me, trying to assess the damage to his own reputation. He still didn't understand. He thought this was about him. I was about to put the phone away when it rang again. This time, the screen showed a different name, Anna. On impulse, I answered, curious to hear the second-in-command's tactical approach. "Mariana," she began, her voice a low, urgent hiss. There was none of the syrupy politeness from last night. This was the unvarnished Anna. "I don't know what kind of stunt you're trying to pull, but you need to stop it right now. You're upsetting David. He's had a terrible shock." I held the phone slightly away from my ear, listening to her words as if they were a scientific curiosity. She was accusing me of upsetting the man who had professionally diagnosed me as a burdensome failure in front of his own child. The sheer breathtaking audacity of it was almost impressive. "Hello, Anna," I said, my voice as calm and neutral as a recorded message. "I'm afraid I'm rather busy at the moment." "Busy? Busy doing what? Scheming? You went to his old dean like some vindictive child. David has a reputation to maintain. His entire career." "As I said," I interrupted, my tone unwavering, "I'm busy. Goodbye." I ended the call before she could respond. The feeling was not of triumph, but of profound, sad clarity. They were a team. Not a husband and wife united in love, but co-conspirators united in self-interest. They had no conception of my inner world, no understanding of the line they had crossed. They saw my reaction not as a consequence of their actions, but as a problem to be managed. The barrage from David began in earnest then. A cascade of calls I silenced without looking. The texts became a running commentary of his descent into panic. "Mom, answer your phone." Henderson was talking about the alumni board and professional conduct. "This is serious." "What do you want? Is it about the money? We can talk about the money." So predictable. He thought he could buy his way out of a moral debt. He thought a wire transfer could heal the wound he had inflicted with his words. He was a brilliant doctor, but he knew nothing of the human heart. "Anna told me you hung up on her. You're acting completely irrational. You're not well. Maybe we should get you properly assessed." The threat was veiled, but clear. He was pulling out his ultimate weapon again, my health. He was suggesting that my rebellion was a symptom of illness, of incompetence. It was a pathetic, desperate move, and it only strengthened my resolve. I let the phone buzz and flash on the table for nearly an hour. I watched it as one might watch a storm from a safe distance, a chaotic display of light and noise that could no longer touch me. I was the calm eye of his hurricane. Finally, the message that I had been waiting for arrived, the one that came not from a place of arrogance or strategy, but from a place of pure, undiluted fear. "Mom, you're ruining my life." There it was, the howl of a man who had built his world on a foundation of my sacrifice and now felt the ground shudder beneath him. He wasn't worried about me. He wasn't ashamed of his cruelty. He was terrified of the consequences. His life, not our family, not my health, his life. I picked up the phone. My fingers were steady as I typed out my reply. I considered each word, honing it, giving it the weight and sharpness it deserved. This was not a text message, it was a verdict. "No, David, I'm just sending you the bill." I paused, letting the first sentence stand alone in its power. Then I continued. "Not for the money, but for the words. We'll discuss payment terms later." I hit send. The 3 small dots indicating he was typing appeared almost instantly, a frantic digital pulse. I didn't wait to see what desperate plea or venomous threat would come next. It didn't matter anymore. I had said everything that needed to be said. I navigated to his contact profile. His picture smiled up at me, a professional headshot, confident and successful. The man I had created, the man I now had to dismantle. My thumb hovered over the option on the screen. It felt so final, so cold. But it was necessary. It was the only way to enforce the new boundary. It was an act not of anger, but of sanitation. I pressed block this caller. A confirmation window popped up. "Are you sure you want to block this contact?" I looked around my quiet apartment, at the life I had built, the life I had almost allowed them to devalue into nothing. I thought of the orthopedic cushion hidden behind a vase and the cool, dismissive look on my daughter-in-law's face. I thought of my son's voice, turning the gift of his education into a weapon against me. Yes, I was sure. I confirmed the action, and just like that, he was gone. The buzzing stopped, the screen was dark. The silence that filled my apartment was absolute, profound, and for the first time in a very long time, it was entirely my own. I had not just tested the boundaries, I had built a fortress and sealed the gate, and I was finally, completely, in control. Blocking David was like closing a valve on a pressurized pipe. The silence that followed was profound, but I knew it was the deceptive calm before a physical breach. A man like my son, a man whose entire identity was built on control and prestige, would not be deterred by a digital wall. He would simply find another door to break down. It took him less than 24 hours. The knock on my apartment door was not the polite tap of a guest, but the hard, insistent rap of someone who believed they had a right to enter. I looked through the peephole. It was him. He stood in the hallway, his face pale and drawn, his expensive overcoat looking rumpled, as if he'd slept in it. He looked smaller, somehow, stripped of the professional authority he wielded like a shield. He just looked like a panicked man. Beside him, a half-step behind, stood Anna. Her face was a mask of cold fury, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. They were a united front of desperation. I took a deep breath. My heart was beating a steady, calm rhythm. There was no fear, no anxiety, just a quiet readiness. I had spent the morning preparing for this moment, not just emotionally, but physically. On my small coffee table, placed with geometric precision in the center, sat a single object, a framed, high-quality copy of his medical diploma from the university. The one I had paid to have professionally framed for him as a graduation gift. He had politely declined to hang it in his minimalist office, saying it was a bit old-fashioned, so I had kept it, a monument to my investment. I opened the door, but only as far as the security chain would allow. It was a clear, physical boundary. You may stand on my threshold, but you may not enter my world without permission. Mariana, David began, his voice strained. He was trying to sound reasonable, the voice of the calm doctor addressing a hysterical patient. It was a pathetic echo of his power from the dinner table. We need to talk. Can we please come in? I don't think so, I said, my voice quiet but firm. This hallway seems appropriate for the conversation we are about to have. I was denying him the comfort of a civilized setting, keeping him in the neutral, impersonal space he deserved. Anna scoffed. For God's sake, Mariana, stop this melodrama. This has gone far enough. I ignored her completely, my eyes fixed only on David. You have something you want to say, David? Then say it. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration I hadn't seen since he was a teenager cramming for his final exams. Look, Mom, I'm sorry if what I said at dinner was clumsy. Clumsy. The word was an insult. A clumsy person trips over a rug. They don't meticulously dissect a person's worth and declare it insufficient. Clumsy is not the right word, David, I said, my voice as sharp and sterile as one of his surgical tools. Let's be precise. You're a man of science, after all. What you were was calculated. You were cruel, and you were wrong. I was just worried about the finances, he burst out, his voice rising in pitch. The bills, Chloe's future. I was under a lot of pressure. I'm trying to keep this family afloat. This was his last line of defense, the noble patriarch, making the tough choices for the good of the family. It was time to dismantle it. Stop, I said, the single word cut through his blustering. Stop talking. You are not a financier, David. You are a doctor. You took an oath. Your primary concern is supposed to be health and well-being, not balance sheets. But at that dinner table, you didn't see your mother. You saw a liability on a spreadsheet. I paused, letting the truth of my words sink into the sterile hallway air. You used your medical degree, the one I paid for, to give me a diagnosis. You diagnosed me as a burden. You diagnosed me as a threat to your daughter's future. You weaponized your profession against the person who gave you that profession. His face crumpled. The last vestiges of his authority were gone, washed away by the tide of my surgical truth. He looked at the floor, unable to meet my gaze. I didn't mean it like that, he mumbled. It was the weakest of protests. That is the only way you could have meant it, I countered. So now, we're going to have a follow-up consultation. You and I. You see, a diagnosis requires a treatment plan, and I have one for you. I unlatched the security chain and opened the door just enough to step into the hallway with them, closing the door behind me. I wanted no furniture between us. I wanted him to face me, exposed and without retreat. I was now his doctor, and this was his examination. I am not interested in your money, David, I said, my voice low and intense. You seem to think that's the root of this problem, but it's not. My financial needs are my own concern now. I'll handle them. This is about your moral debt, and the payment for that is not financial. It is ethical. He looked up, confused. Anna watched me with narrowed, hateful eyes, her mind clearly racing, trying to understand what my angle was. You want to make this right? I continued. Then you will formally retract your diagnosis, publicly. David stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. What are you talking about? The next time we have a family dinner, and there will be a next time, for Chloe's sake, You will stand up in front of Anna, in front of your daughter, and you will look at me, and you will say these words. You will say, I was wrong. My mother's health is a fact, not a fault. Her value to this family has nothing to do with her medical bills. She is not a burden. She is my mother, and I am grateful for every sacrifice she ever made for me. The color drained completely from his face. Anna let out a small, strangled gasp. I wasn't asking for an apology. I was demanding a confession, a public humiliation that precisely mirrored the one he had inflicted upon me. I was forcing him to dismantle his own cruel narrative with his own mouth. And you will say it to Chloe, I added, delivering the final, crucial term. You will look your daughter in the eye, and you will tell her that a person's worth is not measured in dollars and cents. You will tell her that caring for family is a privilege, not a financial calculation. You will undo the poison you planted in her mind before it has a chance to take root. You will teach her the lesson you so clearly failed to learn. He was speechless. He looked at Anna, a desperate, silent plea for help, but she was powerless. This wasn't a battle she could fight for him. Her social maneuvering was useless against this kind of direct, moral demand. You're trying to humiliate me, he finally whispered, his voice cracking. No, David, I said, my voice softening for the first time, not with pity, but with the profound sadness of a final lesson. I am trying to heal you. You have a sickness of the soul, and the only cure is a dose of truth. You've built your life on a foundation of my work, and you've forgotten the cost. You need to be reminded. I turned and stepped back into my apartment. I left the door open for a moment and pointed to the coffee table. His eyes followed my finger to the framed diploma. It shone under the light of my reading lamp, his name embossed in elegant gold letters, Dr. David Miller. That piece of paper gave you power, I said quietly, but it was my hands that paid for it. My hands cleaned the floors, my hands answered the phones, my hands packed your lunches. And it seems they can also contact the ethics committee that oversees the use of that power. The choice is yours. You can either perform this one small act of moral surgery to save your family, or you can watch as Mr. Henderson and his colleagues perform a much larger, more public operation on your career. Let me know your decision. With that, I closed the door, shutting them out. I didn't need to lock it. The terms had been set. I walked over to the window and looked down at the street below, not watching for them to leave, but just watching the world go on. I felt no joy, no thrill of victory, just the heavy, somber satisfaction of a necessary procedure completed. I had declared my independence, not from him, but from his judgment. I had taken back my story. The final prognosis was now in his hands. The week that followed my ultimatum was a week of profound, echoing silence. I received no calls, no messages, no more desperate knocks on my door. David and Anna had retreated to their pristine fortress to weigh their options, to calculate the cost of public humiliation versus professional ruin. I knew what the outcome would be. A man like David, whose entire self-worth was intertwined with his title and reputation, would always choose the path that preserved his public face, no matter how much it cost his pride. When the invitation came, it was not from David, but from Chloe. A short, sweet text message with a smiley face emoji. Grandma, are you coming for dinner on Sunday? I'm helping make dessert. It was a clever move, using their daughter as an olive branch, a human shield. They knew I would never say no to her. I replied simply, I wouldn't miss it for the world, sweetheart. Sunday arrived, and as I walked up the stone pathway to their house, I felt a sense of detached calm. I was not entering the lion's den. I was a visiting dignitary, arriving to witness the terms of a treaty being formally ratified. I carried a small, heavy tote bag, its contents prepared with the same meticulous care I had given my meeting with Mr. Henderson. The atmosphere at dinner was thick with a tension so palpable it felt like a fifth person at the table. Anna was a ghost of her former self, her movements stiff, her smile a brittle, painted-on thing. She spoke only when necessary, her words clipped and empty. David looked 10 years older. The confident, authoritative doctor was gone, replaced by a hollowed-out man radiating a quiet, simmering resentment. He avoided my gaze, focusing on cutting his food into needlessly small pieces. Chloe, bless her innocent heart, was the only source of light in the room. She chattered on about school and her friends, either oblivious to the suffocating emotional climate or simply choosing to ignore it. She served the dessert she had made, a slightly lopsided but clearly lovingly prepared chocolate cake, with a proud flourish. Then, the moment came. The plates were cleared. David put down his fork, the sound echoing the one that had started this entire war. He took a shaky breath and slowly, deliberately, pushed his chair back and stood up. The room fell silent. Anna stared fixedly at her empty plate. Chloe looked up at her father, her expression a mixture of confusion and curiosity. David's eyes finally met mine across the table. In them I saw no remorse, no understanding. I saw only the cornered, bitter shame of a defeated man. But it was enough. He was honoring the terms. He turned his gaze to his daughter. "Chloe," he began, his voice raspy, forced. I need to say something. At our last dinner, I said some things about Grandma that were wrong." He paused, swallowing hard. I could almost feel Anna's will trying to pull him back down into his chair, but he continued, a puppet on the strings of his own ambition. "I was wrong," he said, the words sounding like they were being torn from his throat. "Your grandmother's health is a fact, not a fault. Her value to this family has nothing to do with her medical bills." He looked back at me, his eyes dark with a humiliation he would never forgive me for. "She is not a burden. She is my mother, and I am grateful for every sacrifice she ever made for me." The final words were a mumble, but they were audible. He had done it. He had spoken the truth, not because he believed it, but because he had been forced to. He then looked back at Chloe, the hardest part of his penance still to come. "A person's worth, it isn't measured in dollars and cents, sweetheart. Caring for family is a privilege, not a calculation." He sank back into his chair, the performance over. He picked up his water glass, his hand trembling slightly. The air in the room was electric. Anna looked as if she had been slapped. Chloe, however, looked from her father to me, a slow, dawning understanding in her young eyes. She didn't grasp the entire backstory, the threats and the power plays, but she understood the essence of it. She understood that an injustice had been named and a truth had been restored. She smiled at me, a small, conspiratorial smile. In that moment, the torch was passed. After a few more minutes of unbearable silence, I folded my napkin and placed it on the table. "Thank you for a lovely dinner," I said to the room at large. Then I turned to my granddaughter. "Chloe, I brought something for you. Could you help me bring my bag in from the hall?" Her eyes lit up. She eagerly followed me into the foyer, away from the suffocating atmosphere of the dining room. I sat down on the polished wooden bench, the one where my orthopedic cushion had never been welcome, and patted the space beside me. "Sit with me for a moment," I said. From my tote bag, I pulled out not one object, but two. The first was a worn, dusty photo album. The second was a crisp, new bank passbook. I opened the album on our laps. The pages were filled with old, faded photographs. There I was, younger, with lines of exhaustion but not despair, standing behind the counter of a diner, a stained apron tied around my waist. There I was again, in a different uniform, sitting at the switchboard of a downtown office building, the clock on the wall showing 2 to 15 a.m. "What's this, Grandma?" Chloe asked, her small finger tracing the outline of my younger face. "This is a story about an investment," I said softly. "A long time ago, I worked these 2 jobs so I could invest in something I believed in. I wanted to help someone get a very important, very expensive education so they could spend their life helping people. I didn't need to say who it was. She understood. It was a good investment in some ways," I continued, turning a page to a photo of a young David on his graduation day. "The education was a success, but I think I invested in the wrong person. The knowledge went in, but the wisdom didn't." I closed the old album and picked up the new bank passbook. I opened it and showed her the first page. At the top, in clean typed letters, was her name, Chloe Miller. And below it, the first entry, a modest but significant deposit. "An investment isn't just about money, Chloe. It's about faith. It's about believing in someone's potential to be good and do good. My first investment is, well, it's matured, and I've decided to reinvest my assets." I placed the passbook in her hands. Her eyes were wide. "I'm not giving you this money," I explained, my voice earnest. "We are going to build this together. This is the seed for your college fund, or your first business, or a trip around the world. Whatever you choose, we'll look at the statements together. We'll talk about what it means to save and what it means to spend wisely. We'll talk about what makes a good investment not just in stocks, but in people." I looked her in the eye, ensuring she understood the weight of my words. "I am investing in you, Chloe. Not just my money, but my time, my experience, and my faith. Because from what I've seen, you understand the one thing that can't be taught in a university. You understand a person's true worth." Tears welled in her eyes, but she wasn't sad. She threw her arms around my neck, clutching the passbook in her hand. "Thank you, Grandma," she whispered into my shoulder. "I won't let you down." "I know you won't," I said, holding her tight. From the corner of my eye, I could see David and Anna standing in the dining room doorway, silent spectators to their own obsolescence. They were watching me forge a direct, unbreakable alliance with their daughter, built not on the fragile bonds of obligation, but on the solid bedrock of shared values and mutual respect. I was no longer just her grandmother. I was her partner, her mentor. I was founding a new legacy right under their roof, and they were utterly powerless to stop it. The victory at the dinner table had been a tactical necessity. This, however, this was the real triumph. This was not about ending a war. It was about planting a garden for the future. The months that followed were like the slow, quiet healing after a major surgery. The raw wounds of betrayal began to scar over, leaving not ugliness, but the faint, silvery lines of a story that had been survived. My life found a new rhythm, a new purpose. It was a rhythm dictated not by the needs of others, but by the shared ambitions of a new partnership. Twice a month, Chloe would come to my apartment after school. We would sit at my small kitchen table, the worn photo album and her bank passbook laid out between us. Our meetings were our own special ritual. We would drink tea, hers milky and sweet, mine strong and black, and we would talk. We talked about her history project on pioneering women in science. and we allocated a small amount from her fund for research books. We talked about her friend who was struggling, and we discussed the concept of charity not as a handout, but as an investment in someone's well-being. I was teaching her about finances, yes, but it was a lesson wrapped in the language of ethics, empathy, and self-worth. I watched her grow, not just in height, but in wisdom. She started asking questions that reached far beyond her years. Questions about fairness, about integrity, about what it truly means to be successful. In her bright, curious eyes, I saw my legacy, not the doctor in his sterile office, but the fierce, compassionate young woman sitting across from me, learning to build a life on a foundation of solid values. I was not just her grandmother. I had become her mentor, her partner, her first client. One crisp autumn afternoon, there was a knock on my door. It was a softer, more hesitant knock this time. I opened it to find David standing alone in the hallway. He looked tired, the lines around his eyes deeper than I remembered. He held a single white envelope in his hand. "Hello, Mom," he said. The word "mom" still sounded strange in his mouth, like a borrowed word from a language he no longer spoke fluently. "David," I replied, my tone polite but neutral. I did not invite him in. Our relationship now existed in these formal, liminal spaces, doorways and hallways, never the warmth of a shared room. He held out the envelope. "This is the first payment," he said, his gaze fixed on a point just over my shoulder. "For your medical expenses. I've arranged for it to be a direct transfer from now on, but I wanted to bring the first one myself." I took the envelope from his hand. Our fingers brushed for a fleeting second, and I felt nothing. No anger, no resentment, no lingering pain, just a profound and final distance. He was no longer the center of my world, the sun around which my entire life had orbited. He was just a man in a hallway, fulfilling an obligation. I opened the envelope and looked at the check inside. The amount was substantial. A year ago, this piece of paper would have represented my survival, a lifeline I was dependent on. Now, it was simply a tool, a resource to be allocated. "Thank you, David," I said. I turned, leaving him standing in the doorway, and walked over to my small writing desk. I picked up a pen, and in the space on the back designated for endorsements, I signed my name. Then, beneath it, I wrote the words that sealed the final transfer of power, the final transformation of my life's investment, for deposit only to the account of Chloe Miller. I walked back to the door and handed the endorsed check back to him. He stared at it, his eyes tracing the letters of his daughter's name, written in my steady hand. He finally understood. His money, his penance would never reach me. It would bypass me completely, flowing directly into the future I was now building, a future in which he was merely a financial contributor, not a central figure. "Thank you," I said again, my voice gentle but resolute. "You've finally started investing in the right future." He looked up at me then, and for the first time, I saw something in his eyes beyond shame or resentment. I saw a flicker of bitter understanding. He knew, in that moment, that he could never repair what he had broken. He could never go back to being the hero of my story. His role was now a supporting one, forever defined by this single corrective action. He had lost not just my money, but my faith, and that was a currency he could never earn back. He simply nodded, turned, and walked away. As I closed the door, I felt no sense of victory, only a quiet, peaceful finality. The war was over. The treaties were signed. The new world had been founded. Later that week, Chloe came for our meeting, her face flushed with excitement. She pulled a folded piece of paper from her school bag. It was a certificate from a local animal shelter. "Look, Grandma," she said, her eyes shining. "We talked about investing in the community, remember? So I took a little from my personal allowance, not the fund. I know that's for big things, and I sponsored a kennel at the shelter for a month. It means one of the older dogs who has trouble getting adopted has a safe place to stay." I looked at the certificate, at the picture of a scruffy, one-eyed terrier mix staring hopefully at the camera. And in that moment, a wave of pure, unadulterated grace washed over me. It was a feeling so profound it almost brought me to my knees. The pain, the sacrifice, the bitter betrayal it had all led to this small act of kindness. To this young woman who understood that wealth meant nothing if it wasn't used to lift others up. That evening, as the sun set, casting long shadows across my quiet living room, I sat in my armchair, a cup of tea warming my hands. I thought about the journey. I thought about the man who had used his knowledge to wound me, to diagnose me, to label me. He diagnosed me as a burden, I thought to myself, a faint smile touching my lips. But he was wrong in his terminology. I was never the burden. I was the foundation. And he forgot that when a foundation decides to shift, the entire house built upon it comes crashing down. I looked at Chloe's certificate on the mantelpiece. A new structure was being built, a smaller, stronger, more honest one. Something that could weather any storm. Something that would never, ever betray its own purpose. And I, Mariana, was the architect, finally at peace, finally home, finally free.